Gandhi's Passion: The Life and Legacy of Mahatma Gandhi by Stanley Wolpert. He even wrote to Winston Churchill as colonial undersecretary, requesting a private interview to place the whole position before him, and was granted an audience shortly before leaving London. Churchill had answered a question in the Commons a few days earlier, arguing that it is very desirable to keep the white and coloured quarters apart. Gandhi tried to convince Churchill of the inhumanity of his viewpoint, but the century's two greatest leaders of India and England rarely agreed on any issue. Winston later maligning the Mahatma as a fraud and as a scoundrel. Liberal John Morley, on the other hand, not only warmly welcomed Gandhi and his deputation to the India office, but was also supportive of all he heard that he swayed Elgin and their Liberal Prime Minister Campbell Bannerman, as well as the rest of the Great Britain's cabinet to veto the Transvaal Ordinance. In his half decade at the helm of London's India office, Morley laboured mightily to open British India's narrowly despotic administration to representative and responsible change. But Morley saw little value in the idea of appointing another royal commission, which usually took so long in gathering evidence that its report proved hopelessly irrelevant. Gandhi appreciated Morley's kind words and sympathy, as well as those of others, but in his own deputation notes, penned the next day, he reflected with penetrating political insight that we would get no redress until we acquire strength like the whites. We should realize that our salvation lies in our own hands. The deputation sailed back to Cape Town on the RMS Brighton, and welcoming receptions cheered them there and in Johannesburg before the year's end. On January 1st, 1907, Gandhi addressed his natal Indian Congress in Durban, informing them that British rule is essentially just. But we should not be elated by our success. Our struggle has just begun. Now we have to explain things to the politicians here. This would not, of course, be easy. 2 days later, Gandhi told Durban's Mohammedan Association that he felt certain the reason they succeeded in turning Britain's government around was thanks to the perfect accord that obtained between Mr. Ali and myself. We acted with love and in concert. Though following different religions, we remained united in our struggle. Secondly, truth and justice were on our side. I believe God is always near me. He is never away from me. It was his first public profession of constant proximity to God, but it would not be his last. Though still dressed as a British barrister, Gandhi now began to sound more like a Mahatma. The suffragette movement was on in force during Gandhi's brief visit to London, and he reported to his community the reply of the Chancellor of Exchequer, Herbert Asquith, to the women of Great Britain that if all of them demanded the franchise, it could not be granted. Gandhi told his followers that under British rule, justice is often not to be had without some show of strength, whether of the pen, of the sword, or of money. For our part, we are to use only the strength that comes from unity and truth. That is to say, our bondage in India can cease this day if all the people unite in their demands and are ready to suffer any hardships that may befall them. The remaining 40 years of his life would be spent in explaining, in reiterating, and in implementing this passionate, inspired prescription for winning freedom for the people of India, or indeed for any enslaved or politically oppressed people. Gandhi was moved to write about the 800 English women who marched on Parliament in February, fearlessly courting imprisonment. We believe these women have behaved in a manly way. He was bracing his community for the struggle ahead, knowing that though he'd convinced Britain's home government to reject the Transvaal colony's ordinance, that same government had now given the Transvaal full responsible rule, which meant they could reintroduce the same ordinance on their own. Their deputation's victory thus offered his community but a brief respite. In March of 1907, General Louis Botha, who had fought the British, capturing Churchill, among others, during the Boer War, was elected first Prime Minister of independent Transvaal and 3 years later of the Union of South Africa. Botha's greatest assistant and successor was General Jan Smuts, South Africa's foremost legal mind, statesman, architect of South Africa's union, and Gandhi's most brilliant South African adversary. The Transvaal's new Boer Parliament reintroduced and passed the Asiatic Registration Ordinance as its first order of official business, leaving Indians staggered by the swiftness of that action. Gandhi immediately responded by calling a mass meeting and reminding his community of their promise to refuse to obey that Black Act and instead to welcome entering the palace of prison. He cabled Lord Elgin, of course, urging him at least to postpone any royal decision on the act passed by the new Dominion. And in early April, Gandhi led a deputation to Pretoria to call on Colonial Secretary Smuts and argue against the new act. Royal assent was granted in May to the Transvaal Asiatic Registration Act. Gandhi repeated his earlier pledge never to register and called upon all members of the Indian community not to swerve, not to fail in doing their duty. Many of his friends, however, asked how. Gandhi's answer had long before been supplied by Martin Luther. We have now earned the freedom to burn all permits together with the new ones. Not a single person must enter the permit office. A final date will be fixed for taking out new permits. Only after that date can the doors of Prison Palace open for us. The new act requiring Indians to register was gazetted to be enforced starting July 1st, 1907. On Sunday, June 30th, Gandhi's community turned out in numbers too great to fit inside any home in Pretoria. If any Indian, big or small, should accept the title deed of slavery under the law, Gandhi told that enormous crowd, others would not follow. Those who kept themselves free would win in the end. Indians in Pretoria started to picket outside the permit office to keep Indians tempted to enter it from doing so, and Gandhi soon urged them to extend that boycott to Durban. A week later, however, several Indians appealed to Jan Smuts, asking him not to require those who registered to give their mother's name or to be fingerprinted by black police. Smuts sent a long and very ingenious reply which made Gandhi's blood boil. He agreed to withdraw the mother's name requirement, most obnoxious to Muslims, and also to promise that no black policeman would ever fingerprint any Indian. After reducing us to a living death, could there be a fresh amendment in order to kick at the dead? An outraged Gandhi cried. It should be noted that no single point has Mr. Smuts given up his obstinacy. With God as our witness, we have pledged opposition to the law. With the same God as witness, let us prove our courage. Braced as he was for martyrdom, this was one of the few times in his life that Gandhi lost his temper, shifting his tone from calm reasonableness to heated anger or clear tribute to Smuts' negotiating skills. Boycott, permit office. By going to Gaul We suffer for our common good and self respect. Gandhi wrote on a poster hammered up Luther like onto the door of the permit office in Pretoria. Loyalty to the king demands loyalty to the king of kings. Indians be free. Indians in the Transvaal will stagger humanity without shedding a drop of blood. Gandhi later explained in his weekly journal, Gentle Jesus, the greatest passive resistor the world has seen in their pattern, was not Jesus rejected, and yet did he not resist the blasphemy that his persecutors would have him utter on pain of suffering what was, in their estimation, an inglorious death, side by side with thieves and robbers. But the crown of thorns today sits better on that bleeding head than a crown bedecked with diamonds. He died indeed, yet he lives in the memory of all true sons of gods. So too will Indians of the Transvaal, if they remain true to their God, live in the memory of their children, who will be able to say, Our forefathers did not betray us for a mess of pottage. The British community worked hard in London to rally support for Gandhi's struggle, and its secretary, Louis Rich, kept him informed daily by cable of all those he contacted in the parliament and the cabinet, and sent him every newspaper report as well. Gokhale, of course, worked even harder to win support for South Africa's Indians, not only from every member of India's National Congress but also from colleagues on the Viceroy's Legislative Council, including Jinnah, who was at this time still a leader of the Congress. Surrender not. Nirjia also cabled him warmest sympathy from Calcutta, as did William Wedderburn from London. Gandhi's valiant efforts thus were applauded by the best and most principled leaders of three continents by the fall of 1907. Nonetheless, some Indians were registering in Johannesburg. Gandhi cautioned his pickets not to assault them, for any such assaults would turn our success into failure. The first Indian to be prosecuted in the Transvaal under the new act was Hindu priest Ram Sundar Pandit, arrested in Germiston on November 8, 1907. Gandhi appeared on Ram's behalf in court but offered no defense since his client admitted he had no permit and wished to offer no bail though. Scores of Indians had offered to bail him out. Thanks to Gandhi's appeal, Ram was released without bail. Ram was later sentenced to 1 month imprisonment under the Asiatic Act. Mass protest meetings were held and Gandhi addressed them. If after sending Pandit to Gaul, any Indian submits to the obnoxious law, we do not think he deserves the name of man. Hindus and Muslims have become completely united. This work concerns all Indians. Gandhi wrote for Indian Opinion that November. Gandhi was arrested and first tried on 28th December 1907 in Johannesburg's criminal court, accused and found guilty of having no registration certificate. He was ordered to leave the colony with 48 hours. He refused to obey, however, and on January 10, 1908, was called back to the court, where he was to be sentenced to prison together with several other leaders of the community. He was now charged with contempt of court for having disobeyed the order to leave and sentenced to 2 months' imprisonment without hard labor. The police led him off to the prison cell and shut the door. His incarceration distressed him more deeply than he had imagined it would. I was somewhat agitated and fell into deep thought. Home the courts were I practice. The public meeting, all these passed away like a dream. Would I have to serve the full term? If the people courted imprisonment in large numbers, there would be no question of serving the full sentences. But if they failed, 2 months would be as tedious as an age. How vain I was! I, who had asked the people to consider the prisons as His Majesty's hotels, and the sacrifice of one's life itself as supreme enjoyment. Where had all this knowledge vanished today? Passive resistance was the English term generally used for the struggle that Gandhi first launched in South Africa. He wanted to find an Indian word for it, however, and invited suggestions through Indian opinions, finally receiving the one he liked best from his own cousin, Magan Lal Gandhi, a Sanskrit compound of Satya, meaning truth, and Agraha, meaning hold fast to. Satyagraha, hold fast to the truth, could alternately be rendered truth force, and since Gandhi equated truth with love, himsa, which literally meant non violence, it might also be called the force of love. Such is the miraculous power of Satyagraha. He wrote on the eve of going to the prison. I seem to hear it whispered in my ear that God is always the friend and protector of truth. Our success in bringing this campaign to this stage is a triumph for truth. But his struggle had only just begun. Chapter 8, Victory Through Suffering. After little more than 2 weeks in jail, Gandhi and friends arrested with him agreed to the voluntary registration of the entire Indian community of Transvaal if General Smuts would agree to withdraw the Asiatic Registration Act with its element of compulsion. To Gandhi's way of thinking, the dishonor in the act lay in its enforcement by the government, not in the issuing of permits nor even in taking fingerprints, a point that many members of the community would continue, however, to consider obnoxious. The substance of the proposed settlement was that the Indians should voluntarily register and not under any law. Gandhi explained. On January 30th, 1908, the superintendent of the police took him to meet General Smuts. They had a good talk, Smuts congratulating him on the Indian community's having remained firm even after Gandhi's imprisonment. Gandhi then caught the next train back to Johannesburg and went directly to inform all his friends of the agreement, suggesting that in a meeting there should be announcement. It was held on the grounds of the mosque that very night, and despite the short notice, nearly 1,000 Indians turned up. Not everyone attending that meeting, however, was pleased with what Gandhi reported, though all were surprised to find him a free man again and hear that he had spoken with General Smuts. Skeptics doubted if they could take the general at his word. Some posed even harsher questions, asking if Gandhi had been paid anything by Smuts to change his mind. We have heard that you have betrayed the community and sold it to the general for 15,000 pounds. One giant Pathan in his audience shouted, I swear with Allah as my witness that I will kill the man who takes the lead in applying for registration. Another charged. It was the first but would not be the last time that some of Gandhi's followers doubted his integrity. Gandhi never hesitated to reverse his position, particularly if he learned that his followers used violent tactics or sensed that his opponent underwent an honest change of heart, as he now believed true of Smuts. To those who feared treachery, Gandhi argued, a satyagrahi bids goodbye to fear. He is therefore never afraid of trusting the opponent. For an implicit trust in human nature is the very essence of his creed. Nor did he pay heed to threats. It is God in whom I placed my trust while launching on this struggle. He softly explained. It is He who has given this unexpected victory, and it is Him, therefore, that we must give our thanks. Undeterred, he left for the permit office the next morning, resolved to be the first to register voluntarily as he had promised Smuts. Gandhi found a tall, powerful Pathan waiting at his own Satyagraha office to follow him towards the permit office that morning. Before they reached the registration office, the man knocked Gandhi to the ground with a series of heavy blows. The words, He Rama, O God, on Gandhi's lips. 40 years, less one day later, he would utter that same cry again after 3 bullets pierced his heart. This time, he sustained only scalp wounds and bruised ribs. He pressed no charges against the Pathan but reiterated his faith in Smuts, insisting that it is the sacred duty of every good Indian to help the government and the colony to the uttermost. Gandhi recuperated from his beating in the home of Johannesburg's Baptist minister, the Reverend Joseph J. Doak, and his wife, who cared for their friend for weeks. Those who have committed the act did not know what they were doing. Gandhi wrote in February, I request that no steps be taken against them. Seeing that the assault was committed by a Mohammedan, Hindus might probably feel hurt. Rather, let the blood spilt today cement the two communities indissolubly. Such is my heartfelt prayer. Many Transvaal Indians were confused when Gandhi told them that they had won a victory, viewing it instead as a defeat. He wrote at length trying to explain the deep and basic differences between voluntary and compulsory behavior. In expounding the secret of Satyagraha, Gandhi quoted Henry David Thoreau's arguments in his Duty of the Civil Disobedience. He also referred again to Luther, thanks to whom Germany enjoys freedom, and there was Galileo, who opposed society, and Columbus, who acted like a true satyagrahi when threatened with death by his sailors, who wanted to turn their ship back, saying, I am not afraid of being killed, but I think we ought to go on. Deriving his inspiration from many heroic figures, Gandhi went on to explain, Satyagraha is really an attitude of mind. He who has attained it will remain ever victorious, irrespective of whether it is a government or a people that he opposed, whether they be strangers, friends, or relatives. Had he not recently waged and won such battles after all, with Lakshmidas, Harilal, and Kasturba, as well as with Sheikh Mehtab and Smuts, and the devil within himself? Though Gandhi tried his best to gloss over the growing Hindu Muslim conflict and communal mistrust among South African Indians, the problem became so serious before the end of February 1908 that he felt obliged to write a letter to Indian Opinion explaining that though Hindus stood with him in implementing the compromise, Muslims wrote condemnatory letters. The founder president of the Ahmadiyya Islamic Society, Haji Ali, who had accompanied him to London, was foremost among those who no longer fully trusted him. Because I was a Hindu, Gandhi sadly reported. Ali cabled his concerns about Gandhi to Privy Council Muslim member Sayyid Amir Ali, whom he had met in London, expressing his mistrust of Gandhi and his opposition to Satyagraha. Ali's fears was that Gandhi's boycott would ruin thousands of Muslim merchants like himself without harming any South African Hindus, all of whom were hawkers and peddlers. Ali's fears were not unfounded. He lost so much of his prosperous trade that he moved back to India just before Satyagraha started. The Pathans eventually sent a telegram complaining of Muslim fears to Jinnah, which Gandhi considered a most regrettable sign of weakness. It was the first time anyone ever told Jinnah of Gandhi's Hindu bias. But for the most of the rest of his life, he would accuse Gandhi of precisely such bias and anti Muslim prejudice. When Gandhi recovered enough to travel again, he took a train to Durban in order to explain the agreement he had reached with Smuts to the troubled Indian community of Natal. Once again, he was almost killed by an angry Pathan armed with a big stick. Luckily, he was surrounded by volunteers and escaped without injury. He had felt no fear, passionately noting that nothing better can happen to a satyagrahi than meeting death all unsought in a very act of pursuing the truth. 3 months after Gandhi's agreement with Smuts, however, he felt betrayed. Gandhi believed Smuts had promised faithfully to repeal the Black Act as soon as most Indians registered themselves voluntarily. In late May, however, with more than 7,000 of the 9,000 Indians having completed voluntary registration, Smuts warned that after June 9, all registered Asiatics would be subject to enforced registration under the old Act or to be expelled immediately. Asked why he had trusted Smuts, Gandhi now replied, "That is how political affairs always have been and will be conducted. General Smuts' falsehood will prove unavailing." He called upon his community to prepare again for Satyagraha. In the interim, he wrote as many people as possible, giving interviews to every reporter willing to listen to him, ever willing to discuss matters with his adversary. He also returned to Smuts but found him obstinate and called him dishonest. In late June, Smuts offered to repeal the obnoxious law, but only on certain conditions, which Gandhi deemed unacceptable. The community united behind Gandhi's adamant position, and Indians started going back to prison. After brief courtroom appearances where Gandhi represented them and requested that they be sentenced to maximum punishment or hard labor. Satyagrahis, he argued, must always welcome the harshest punishment, never plead for leniency. Among those Indians jailed in the late July of 1908 was his son Harilal, then living in South Africa and for this period at least willing to follow in his father's footsteps. Gandhi requested a severe sentence for his son and co-accused, arguing that it would be better for the sake of their health if they had a sustained term. The magistrate sentenced Harilal to just 7 days at hard labor. In response to inquiries as to why he sent his son to jail, Gandhi explained, "It will be a part of Harilal's education. Every Indian, whatever his status, must go to Gaul for the sake of his country. In every great war, more than one battle has to be fought." Gandhi informed his community. The same is true of the Transvaal Indians' Satyagraha. General Smuts has now proved political status and provided the opportunity to complete what was prematurely abandoned. Those who were angry with the leaders of having prematurely called off the campaign have now an opportunity to lay down their lives for the sake of the honor and rights of Indians. Brave Indians, arise, draw the sword of Satyagraha and fight unto victory. The people of the East will never, never again submit to insult from the insolent whites. Tilak's new party of revolutionary nationalism, born with the partition of Bengal, had gained popularity throughout India by this time. Breaking away from the moderate old Congress party, the new party advocated the use of amulets like bombs and pistols, as well as the boycott of all things British, in their race towards the goal of Swaraj or self rule. But Gandhi cautioned against the illusion of ends won by violent means. Real Swaraj Insists in restraint, he wrote. Many people exult at the explosion of bombs. This only shows ignorance. If all British were to be killed, those who killed them would become the masters of India, and India would continue in a state of slavery. The bombs with which the British have been killed will fall on India after the British leave. He thus rejected violence in all its forms, even as he did the accumulation of gold and silver with its glittery allures.